Hello, I'm Bert Bronius, and this presentation is about Benjamin Bloom and planning cognitive objectives. One of the first steps in planning to teach is thinking about the desired outcome or outcomes of a learning experience. Whether shaping behaviors, attitudes, experiences, or knowledge, defining clear objectives or goals is basic to the process. Defining objectives answers the question, what are the intended results of a teaching learning experience? This presentation describes a valuable resource that was specifically developed for planning knowledge outcomes. Delving into the cognitive domain, this presentation explores the work of Benjamin Bloom for understanding and planning cognitive outcomes. Benjamin Bloom is one of the legends in the landscape of learning luminaries. An educator at the University of Chicago in the 1950s, he is best known for what is popularly referred to as Bloom's Taxonomy. The name comes from the title of his first 1956 publication, Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, the Classification of Educational Goals. The taxonomy is a hierarchically structured classification system of learning goals in the cognitive domain. It continues to be a foundational reference for helping teachers and curriculum developers plan, implement, and evaluate learning at different levels of thinking. This presentation will define key words, describe the different levels of the taxonomy, identify common terms for writing cognitive objectives, provide an example for each level, and suggest questions that can be asked by teachers for each of the levels. Finally, applicational assumptions and advice are given for applying Bloom's work to church and school education. Three key words are worth noting. These are taxonomy, hierarchy, and cognition. Taxonomy is a term used in the sciences to name and organize things into groups that have similar characteristics. Hierarchy is used in Bloom's taxonomy, refers to levels of thinking being built upon one another, with mastery of one level normally necessary before being able to fully function at the next level. To visualize this, the structure of a pyramid is used in Bloom's design. And cognition, which refers to intellectual and mental processes that are used in acquiring knowledge of facts, as well as reasoning, reflection, and critical thinking skills. The following descriptions summarize the 6 levels of the taxonomy. In the original work, the levels are knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, as illustrated in the next slide and also previewed in the little triangle at the bottom of this slide. Each level is defined and supplemented with an example of an outcome statement, outcome-related words, and questions representative of the level. These can be used by teachers in planning cognitive results. Here's the taxonomy with the bottom level, the foundational level being knowledge, working its way up to higher level thinking, referred to as synthesis and evaluation. We'll now describe each of the 6 levels. Knowledge is recalling specific factual information. This level is foundation to future levels. An outcome example would be name 3 moral values. Outcome words are words like define, describe, and list. And questions that are asked at the knowledge level are what is, where is, how did this happen, and can you recall, and questions like that. The next level is comprehension. which is defined as understanding the meaning of information. An example would be summarize what it means to forgive someone. Outcome words are things like compare, describe, discuss, and explain. And questions at the comprehension level are how would you compare or compare and contrast? How would you rephrase the meaning of? And what is the main idea in your mind? Application is the using of knowledge in a new but similar form about a particular situation. So an example of this would be being able to talk about words and behaviors that show an understanding of forgiveness in a real-life situation. Outcome words are things like choose, develop, demonstrate, or use, and educate. And questions that are at the application level are questions like how would you use or how would you show your understanding of? The next level is analysis, which is taking knowledge apart and breaking into its primary segments. An example would be compare and contrast the different ways of dealing with forgiveness. Outcome words are things like categorize, classify, compare, and diagram. Questions could be what are the parts or features of something? Why do you think such an issue? And can you list the parts of? Next is synthesis, putting together the parts of information to create something new. We do this when we write or when we summarize. So an outcome example would be summarize what you would like a person to say to you in asking forgiveness regarding an issue that has created tension between you and that person. Outcome words include arrange, compile, compose, construct, summarize, and questions at this level are how would you improve? What would happen if? What way would you design? What would you adapt to create something different? Finally, the highest level, evaluation, in Bloom's 1956 taxonomy, and that is defined as making judgments about the value of information and ideas. An example of an outcome would be describe your opinion of a person who refuses to forgive and tell why you feel this way. Outcome words are appraise, award, conclude, and contrast. And questions that are at the evaluative level are, do you agree with? What is your opinion of? And what would you recommend? Now, these levels are helpful for identifying ways in which we intend or hope students to think, to use their minds. Before using these levels, I think it's important to review some assumptions, or maybe we should say limiting factors. I refer to these as qualifiers, and several qualifiers should be noted for the use of taxonomy. These include, when using the taxonomy, learners may function within one or more of the domain levels during an educational activity. We need not think that they'll only be in one. And some levels of the taxonomy may be more relevant than others in a specific teaching learning situation. It's not necessary to move consecutively through all the levels. Learners bring prior knowledge and learning styles, and this makes it unrealistic to think that we can use a simple or simplistic approach to developing outcomes. Further, cognition is a dynamic process requiring flexibility in a learning experience. And learners as image bearers of God reflect a divine complexity that frequently does not comply with even the best lesson plans and curriculum designs. We need to respect this and just roll with it. The taxonomy is a resource and not a formula or a prescription. When planning, teachers should give priority to the needs of students and to the learning environment, and that uses goals and objectives to set us in a general direction. And finally, there's some advice for teachers in schools and churches about the use of educational objectives. Normal learning progresses from simple to complex. This natural projection of development requires competence in lower levels of the taxonomy as a basis for more complex mental structures in most, but not all situations. Start simple, activate prior knowledge, and teach in ways that meets needs, including those that are moral, ethical, spiritual, social, psychological, and rational. To the degree that we are able, it is the role of teachers to challenge students to higher, deeper, and more complex levels of thinking, to awaken thought processes in learners that reflect their God-given dignity, worth, and capacity for productive, righteous, loving, joyful, peaceful, and hopeful living. Instructional design involves planning learning activities that are based on assessments made by teachers. These assessments may be made by using formal or informal tools, but the interpretation of these tools is a teacher's responsibility. Teachers, not books or media, have the privilege of cultivating higher level thinking skills. This presentation has provided an overview of Bloom's taxonomy and its application to church and school education. Definitions and keywords were given to understand the taxonomy, and examples were provided for planning educational outcomes. Assumptions and advice were also provided regarding the limitations as well as the benefits of goals and objectives for educational planning. Teachers have the privilege of challenging learners to develop their minds and thought processes to achieve greater depth and complexity through the use of the taxonomy as a planning tool. The final two things are this slide on resources and then a slide that give an end note describing a revision in the taxonomy. Feel free to check out these. The top one is the actual book, which is now in PDF form and can be linked to through this address. This endnote shows the way in which revision has been made to the taxonomy. I chose to describe the first and classic use of the taxonomy. A revision was made in 2001 that puts synthesis, or now called create, at the top of the level and evaluate under it. It's a small difference, but perhaps a very important one. Thank you for attending to this. May God richly bless you in your role as a teacher and leader, and may you have some insights into helping individuals, learners grow in their abilities to think and to live.